So we're going to start off with hubris, rise and fall, huh? Well, before I read it, what's your definition of hubris? Quick, Google it. Who wants to?
Chutzpah with an attitude.
Chutzpah with an attitude. Okay. What else?
Arrogance.
Mm-hmm.
Blinding arrogance.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. Blinding is key because usually people who have problems with this have no idea they do.
Very true.
Narcissism.
On steroids.
Mm-hmm.
So we're getting a little bit of an understanding of hubris. Okay. What would be an example? Who would be a name that you could put next to hubris in the Webster's Dictionary? Anything come to mind?
Trump.
That's what I was going to say.
I think we were all thinking that one.
We're in
All
agreement.
right. All right. So we just got that out of the way. All right. Fair enough. Do you want me to read it or does someone else want to read this?
I'd like to hear your interpretation.
Me too.
All right. Fair enough. Born of blackboards, water-washed bare. We coo and cry while calendars crawl upstairs of pimpled, fueled dares. We witness ego's sunrise. A shade we fall blind to beliefs, screwing weed roots around ancient truths, engraved by light. Illusions facet folds of hubris to loot eternal connections with charcoal nights, knifing ropes of wisdom so lies may weave, warped memories with whipped of deeds, danced by false prophets and deaf thieves. Hubris triumphs when solos kissed greed, a lover of endless warrants and wants. Ego's demands earthquakes to shatter plates of lies and rolls of haunts to sorrow, pain, loss, and snakes. Out of Eden's land, life and love, teeming with voices, yodeling verity, we're never alone, always above, chimeras blind to diamonds, parody. Who's ever washed a blackboard with a wet cloth?
Oh, I have.
What's the difference between cleaning a blackboard with a wet cloth and an eraser?
Shifting dust versus getting rid of the dust.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Is it fair to say that when we enter this world, when we're born into this world, our blackboards are bare, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Well, it all depends on your version of whether this is a continuation of life since the beginning of time or if it is a brand new life.
Mm-hmm. Then maybe repositioning it to say that coming into this world, we're so young and so new, we just don't know what we know yet. So in a way, we're bare. Is that a fair statement?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
How many of you have a recollection of when you were growing up, how time seemed to just take forever?
God, yes. And now it just flies by.
Yes.
When's Christmas going to get here, right? When's summer going to get here? That sort of thing. So calendars seem to crawl when we were younger. Fair enough?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And how many of you remember young teenage years where our acne starts creeping out and people start staring at us and we succumb to dares? The first dare we give ourselves is walking. We may not be conscious of the notion that our first step is a dare. Does that make any sense?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And in those dares, in those moments where we got stared down, what began to come awake?
I suppose our hubris, because we're going, how dare you?
Our egos, right?
Egos, yeah.
I think they start lighting up between 1 and 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
So the ego starts very early.
Anybody got any memories when they were fairly confident their ego came into full swing? Would you ever recall having a favorite toy taken from you and you thought it was your toy and your toy only?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I grew up with two brothers, so I was always going, this is mine.
I had a privileged existence in this respect. Growing up with 7 brothers, I got my own room. That might be my first instance there.
Or maybe that first allowance. You got paid. You got money in your hand for something. What's our relationship with money and ego? Anybody want to venture in on that one?
The more money, the more ego.
Mm-hmm. It depends on definition of wealth, I think, the attitude toward money. The majority of the world equates money and status as one and the same, it seems.
Very often, yep. So in our youth, where we're trying to strike out on our own sense of individuality, right? Follow?
Mm-hmm.
The sunrise of our ego begins. Think about that. We begin to form an ego based on everything we're trying to navigate. It's a form of self-preservation. What are your thoughts on that?
I think by the age of 2, we've pretty much established a sense of otherness. Some don't fully ascribe to that till 3 or 4, but we're no longer an extension of all there is.
My parents did an amazing job of checking my ego really early. I can't recall it ever being out of control, is the thing. But I do remember early on in my journey of my sexuality, I do remember my ego being inflated.
Or it becoming alive, it becoming a voice in your head, it becoming a direction, providing that, okay, here we go, we're going to start that committee that we talk about in classes, the chaos committee. The ego cannot exist without that chaos committee. True?
True.
All right. Along with us waking up to our individuality, along with us waking up to having to deal with other kids our age and the kindness and the cruelties that they can throw upon us, right? Sometimes in equal measure. Blind to beliefs, screwing weed roots around ancient truth. This is the classic cut the ends of the ham off joke. You've all heard this one, right?
No.
Our parents teach us ways of doing things at a young age that we never questioned. We just absorbed, we wrote it into our root directory, and we do it. Is that an accurate statement?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There's the shade. The shade we fall to beliefs screwing weed roots. I'm not saying what has been taught to me by my parents was good or bad, right or wrong. What I'm saying is it was never examined. It was absorbed. And to me, weeds have a way of doing that, yeah?
Gosh, there were so many. This might get a little scary for me if I go too far, but I think like the staples in my family probably would be religion and keeping the family mess behind closed doors. And I think probably the third one would be the expectation of the world upon me. When it comes to like religion, the expectations of what is good, what is bad. I think that's probably my early sense of worth now that I start thinking about it. Like it was really fed when it comes to what my family, how we endeavored in our religious journey. And then as far as what can be spoken about it, my family is very big on not talking, period, about anything. We don't talk about the pain. We don't talk about the messed up parts. We don't talk about anything. The one emotion that I think is freely acceptable in my family is laughter.
Mm-hmm.
Everything else, you kind of look around the room and see if it's okay, and you realize, nope, it's not okay. We're not doing that right here and right now.
The shade. You don't talk about the shade.
No, we don't talk about the shade at all. When it comes to when I said the expectations of the world upon me, it's like the expectations of me as a young Black woman and what to expect in the world, from the world, was very much early on present, I think.
Hmm.
And it's interesting, as part of the family, the teachings about religion and faith, I had none of that. Religion, faith, none of that was ever discussed in my home. But I can remember as a very young girl, my fondest memories of being a 9-year-old little girl in a little white dress, a little white hat, little white shoes, little white purse, little white Bible, sitting on my front porch out in the country in South Carolina waiting for any church bus to stop and pick me up. And one always did. They would pick me up, take me to church, bring me back. And I can remember that even at that early an age and searching, because home life was so bad that I was searching for something better.
Mm-hmm.
So I've always been a spiritual searcher.
It's a lifelong process, and even beyond.
It sure is.
And that touches upon ancient truths engraved by light. What do you think I'm trying to dance around with that?
Dogma, rules.
Conformity.
When you think of light engraving something, what comes to mind?
The 10 Commandments, Charlton Heston.
Good one.
You think about light touching those truths that you thought were real, that you thought were true.
It literally is casting light into dark, right?
Mm-hmm.
Ancient truths engraved by light, they are always there, but that shade that fell upon us as our ego rises, that light is somehow fuzzed out or blocked. Those ancient truths get muddled by wanting to fit in, by surviving, by dealing with racism and homophobia and sexism and ageism and all the other isms out there. And then our ego gets even more tough. Our warrior kicks in because now we got to survive all these isms. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Those illusions, facet folds of hubris. In other words, those illusions give us a sense of confidence that confidence is a form of hubris. It's a form of self-importance. But we need that self-importance to navigate the streets, the people, daily demands. Thoughts?
So much of growing up is trying to adapt oneself to the beliefs that are handed down to you, which you spend the rest of your life questioning.
That's the truth.
You guys chose the most difficult one to start out with. That's all I have to say.
I wrote
She
him an
did.
email. This is way above my pay grade. I can't figure this out.
Well, I was at least a little comforted that I was the only one struggling with it. You said hubris is to navigate life. I'm still kind of stuck in my preconceived notion of what hubris is, but I'm having a hard time connecting with that.
Has there ever been a moment where pride, excessive pride, maybe it's well earned, maybe you won the game, maybe you got the award, maybe you survived a hellish experience without killing someone, but there's a sense of pride, and that pride got a little excessive, and it had to become excessive because that was your way of dealing with pain and suffering. Is this tracking? Hubris is excessive pride. Excessive. It's okay to be proud, but once we become so like my shit don't stink arena, that excessive pride is where we feed the roots of hubris. It's like putting that fertilizer on the lawn, and then it grows even more because there's a sense of energy around it.
And I've always found that anytime I have felt too much hubris, that there's always been something that will come along to teach me to take it down a notch.
Ding, 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 ding.
I feel like that's where I'm at. Just don't remember any point in my life where I didn't have very present checks. Hubris was just not part of my world. Particularly my mom was very good about always swatting that down.
What I think about is my son went into the Navy. So proud of him. that I bragged and I bragged and I bragged and I bragged. Oh my God, I'm so proud of him. And it didn't end well. That showed me that I had too much pride in that, and that things can happen out of my control to destroy that image that I had that it should be. So my hubris for that situation was even harder when things didn't turn out the way I thought they should.
Hubris has a way of queuing up the life lessons.
Mm-hmm. It sure does.
Those lessons are designed to get us back into the eternal truth.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when I say something about eternal connections, when you hear the words eternal connections, what comes up for you?
I think soul and spirit.
Mm-hmm. That which is founded in love, which carries across time and is experienced, personally experienced later, where belief turns into knowing. And then just as soon as you figure out all of that, things change and you have to flip it again. I was raised in a very strict Roman Catholic background where we were expected to accept the company line, not to question, and to behave, basically. And in the church teachings of that time, and still for some churches it's true today, the notion that Christ is the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through him, was a tenet of the faith. Fast forward 20 years, and I meet this Jewish man, and I begin to understand the joys of Judaism. And by coming to services, experience God within the services. That kind of blew me out of my chair, that no, Christians don't have the market on the eternal. It set me on a life journey of ecumenism and trying to underscore that which connects us rather than divides us. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
When I say
Absolutely.
to some of my Christian friends, you realize that Jesus Christ wasn't a Christian. That's pretty much heresy in some places.
Yeah.
It's been my hope to be able to hold an open mind toward most all belief systems and to find that spark of God within each.
Speaking to your soul, ain't she,
Yes.
Shelsa?
Oh, yes. Yes, indeed. I recently found a term for that called omnist. It's where you look for the light in all faiths and religions. OMNIST, omnist.
Of which contains the ancient truths, that we're all connected.
Mm-hmm.
In that same vein, I've been this conversation of being around the family, and it's like, just pray, just pray, just pray. And I'm like, yeah, I get that, and I agree with that. And then there's some more to this, right? Conversation of homosexuality and my individual faith walk. It's been like, wait a minute, I'm closer now than I ever have been, because I've spent my whole life being told that he knows everything. Before I knew it, before I was even, like, he knows it all. He always has all this knowing. But I'm supposed to lie to him and say that I'm not feeling what I feel. Well, he knows what the hell I feel. So,
Right.
like, for the first time in my life, we are having real conversation. Like, I'm having real dialogue with my higher power, the most naked, authentically that I've ever had in my entire life. And I have more clarity now than I ever have in my entire life. I feel more love now than I have never in my life. And I'm just naturally a loving, compassionate person, but I'm telling you, it's ridiculous how compassionate I am now. And Soul will tell you, long time ago, we've had this long, ongoing conversation about forgiveness and everything, and it just never have made any sense to me what he said about forgiveness and everything. But it's the damnedest thing, excuse my language, but I swear I'm starting to get it. Don't celebrate too much, Soul, because I don't need your head to swell. But I'm starting to get it. is the point.
I think in order to understand it, one has to experience on a level here on Earth between humans some level of total forgiveness from someone. And on the flip side, you have to experience what it's like to forgive someone else. You can't experience joy without sadness, etc. So
I think I've had to learn each experience I have with unconditional love has been all that I've needed to understand the relationship with. Wow, that's deep.
So is it fair to say you're all popping illusions? You're allowing the illusions to dissolve.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
And the frustrating thing about it is it's so anticlimactic. It's like, oh, like it literally is that brightest light shining on it, and you're just like, really? That's it? Oh, okay. Moving on to the next thing.
Engraved by light. Now, the reason why I'm asking you about eternal connections is because in this line, illusions facet folds of hubris to loot eternal connections. In other words, illusions feed our sense of hubris. Hubris has a way of looting, meaning clouding, meaning putting distance, meaning robbing the reality that we are eternally connected to unconditional divine love, right? And the biggest robber of all is anything that we would be described as evil. Evil, what is evil? And you have to explain to me, what is evil? What would you say?
Dark, soulless.
I can think of things that I think are evil, but when you have to describe it, interesting.
well, in this sense, the hubris is presuming that we know what's right and what's wrong, and who are you to tell me? And evil, to me, is a deliberate choice to disconnect oneself from love.
Yeah. I was going to say, I think the difference between something that's misguided and evil is literally the intention behind it.
Well, and it's going to be individualized too. What I think is evil may not be what you think is evil.
Right.
This goes back a few years. There was an author by the name of Dr. Scott Peck. His #1 bestseller was A Road Less Traveled. Does that sound familiar?
Yep.
A lesser known book that he wrote, I can't remember the specific title, but it dealt with what he considered to be the premise of evil. And in a nutshell, he had 3 stages of evil. The first stage is you're completely ignorant of it. You really honestly don't know you're doing something bad. The second stage is you know it's bad, but it's situational. You know, the classic example is the mother or the father, and they've got kids and they're starving and they don't have any money, so they steal something so they can at least feed the kids. They know that that's not good. If all things were different, they wouldn't do that. In Peck's opinion, evil, true evil, are people who know they're doing evil, but come across as saintly. How many times in the news have we heard of these people who have been raised up by the community as the pillar, the salt of the community, only to come to find out they've been molesting their kids, or they knew what they were doing. A classic comedian that in his elder years, he's now in jail because he was drugging young women. Yet we held that particular classic comedian in high regard in his heyday. Is that a fair statement? Charcoal knights, think of this, in the days of the Renaissance, knights, what role did knights play in the scheme of society?
Guardians of the realm, protectors.
And they were to exemplify what's true and noble and right.
We have seen time and time again, we've got the good knights and the bad knights, right? We've got those evil waifs that are going around hacking and slashing people. Then we've got the good knights that are defending virtuousness. True?
Right.
It's the charcoal knights, it's the evil knights that knife the ropes of wisdom. Has there been a point in time where you may have encountered someone who's very charismatic and they sound like they got their shit together and they've got it down. And oh my gosh, yes, that's right. And you get involved with that and it shapes your wisdom in a way that you now beginning to see life differently. Only years later do you wake up to the reality that you were lied to.
Like I saw today, these 3 well-known pastors in their communities, one had a teenage girl that he shared with them, and they were grooming her. And, of course, they've gotten caught and have gone to prison. So I can imagine their flocks and how they feel let down.
In some ways, I think that is the dogma of institutions in general that we all come to experience at one point or time in life, whether it be religion, whether it be, mentorship, teachers or coaches. In general, we all come to experience that in any walk of life, because in general, anything, any institution or anyone who suggests that you should not in any way rely on that God voice inside you is acting opposite of what they're teaching,
Mm-hmm.
Knifing ropes of wisdom.
Yeah.
Have you created such an illusion in order to fit in? You dumb down. You're knifing your wisdom. You're cutting it so that you can be accepted. Charcoal nights comes in many different forms. Have you had those times where you go, I knew better?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. There's this social media post where this quote that is going around this week where it says, queer people don't grow up as ourselves. We grow up playing versions of ourselves that sacrifices authenticity to minimize humiliation and prejudice. The massive task of our adult life is to unpick which parts of ourselves are truly us and which parts we've created to protect us. I said, oh, this man, he read me for all, like that has been my whole last 5 years of my life, has been unpacking all of the parts of me that I've hidden away and reintroducing myself to and introducing myself to for the first time because of exactly what you said.
Charcoal nights. People who do have the best intentions. People who do believe they're doing good. Charcoal nights can have a whole span from the well-intentioned but no good deed goes unpunished sort of thing to people who know they're evil, but yet we, for some reason in society, raise them on a pedestal. I know that we were not going to get through this particular one, and I'm going to just put a pin in this conversation so far. It's stirring up a lot, and what I encourage you to do, I designed this book to be used as a journal. This whole left-hand side of the page is designed to start putting bullet points, thoughts, reflections, put a date by it, put a thought with it. If you need to put some sort of notation to go into your journal on page 62 of your 2020 journal, you continue talking about it, do that. This is where we shake up the snow globe. And while it's shaken up, we have to just allow ourselves to observe it without necessarily judging it, right?
Mm-hmm.
I know that's not easy.
No, it's easy. It didn't used to be easy to me, but it's easy now.
Quick reflection. What did you think of this style? Was this helpful? Was this too much of a blender for this time of night? What should we keep it more light and fluffy?
Oh, I think
I
it's
like
appropriate.
it. Yeah.
Very nicely done.
And can we take up this poem again on the next call
Oh, yes.
and continue?
And in between time, I'm going to put together some web tools that you can use. And I am going to ask each of you to think about writing maybe 2 to 3 sentences of review for this book. It's really important that books get reviewed so they rise a little higher on the index in each site. I put together a little tutorial pamphlet, send it to you. You all know how to click on a link and click in and write reviews. What I'm looking for is if you can log into a few sites and just cut and paste your reviews in, that'd be awesome. And start building a momentum where we can have ongoing conversations, not just once a month.
Pleasure to meet you.
Pleasure to meet you too.
You too.
And likewise, it's been exciting. I'm looking forward to more. Aloha.
Night.
Aloha. Good night.
Aloha.